Before we step into this storm, make sure you subscribe for more chilling tales of betrayal and revenge. Hit the bell so you never miss the next secret revealed. And tell me, do you believe fear can awaken something darker than anyone expects? The storms always spoke to me. Since I was a child, thunder wasn't just a sound in the sky but a living voice that whispered my name, curling inside my head like a secret meant only for me. I used to tell people about it, my parents, my aunts, my cousins. I thought if I explained it, they might understand. But they never did. They only laughed. They said I was fragile, dramatic, inventing things to get attention. Each time I opened my mouth, the laughter grew sharper, until I stopped speaking of it altogether. My cousins were the worst. Every time the sky darkened, they circled me like vultures. They pushed me toward windows when lightning split the sky, they stomped their feet and shouted fake thunder to watch me flinch, and they mimicked my cries until they collapsed in laughter. To them, I wasn't family, I was entertainment. The girl who trembled at storms. The coward. The joke. What they never knew was that the voices were real. When thunder rolled across the valley, it wasn't just noise, it was words. Sometimes they were faint, like static on an old radio. Sometimes they were sharp, calling my name, commanding me to listen. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it never helped. The storm always found a way inside. The first time I realized it wasn't imagination, I was 9. A storm came sudden and violent, the kind that made the ground shake with every strike. That night, the whispers weren't playful or vague. They were frantic, warning me. I begged my aunt not to drive home, sobbing until my chest hurt. Everyone laughed, of course, brushing it off as my usual dramatics. Minutes later, lightning struck a tree along the roadside. My aunt's car spun out and smashed against it. She survived, but the truth burned into me, the storm hadn't just spoken. It had warned me. Even then, no one believed me. They called it coincidence, bad timing, anything but what it really was. Their dismissal stung worse than the accident itself. That was the night I stopped talking about the whispers. I carried them in silence, letting everyone else believe I was just a silly girl afraid of thunder. But silence didn't stop the storm. The older I grew, the louder the voices became. They layered over one another until sometimes I could make out whole phrases, clear as if someone were standing beside me. At night, when thunder rattled my windows, I heard my name stretched across the sky, a summons I couldn't escape. Fear became my constant shadow. My cousins, of course, never stopped mocking me. By the time we were teenagers, they had begun filming me. They kept secret clips of me clutching blankets, crying in dark rooms, too afraid to move while storms raged outside. At family gatherings, they played those moments back with voices full of ridicule, and the adults only chuckled. My parents shrugged it off as teasing. No one cared what it did to me. I clenched my fists under the table and kept quiet. On the surface, I stayed silent. But inside, something bitter was growing. The farmhouse was my worst nightmare. Old, creaking, and perched on a hill, it was always the first to catch the full force of summer storms. I hated staying there. My cousins loved it. It was their stage. I'll never forget the night they locked me in the attic during a storm. I was 15. The wind screamed through the cracks, lightning flashed through the dusty windows, and the whispers in the thunder rose louder than I'd ever heard them. They weren't just murmurs that night. They were promises. Promises that if I listened, I would never be alone, that I could be stronger than I had ever been. I wanted to answer, but fear held me back. So I screamed until my throat burned, while my cousins laughed outside the door, recording my humiliation. That humiliation became routine. Every storm was another performance for them to enjoy. I tried to bury the fear, to keep my hands steady, to force myself into silence. But the whispers betrayed me. They never stopped pressing into my ears, filling my bones, demanding to be heard. And though I wanted to believe I was cursed with weakness, some part of me began to suspect otherwise. The voices didn't feel random anymore. They felt like something passed down. A bloodline secret I hadn't been told. When the forecast announced a violent storm coming over the weekend, dread settled in me like a stone. I tried to avoid the family gathering, inventing excuses, but my cousins pressed harder. They insisted I come, smiling too wide, pretending it was about tradition. I knew them better than that. I knew their eyes too well. They had a plan. That day, the sky darkened hours before the first rain fell. The air was heavy, the kind of pressure that makes your skin prickle. Even before the first thunderclap, the voices had started. They were louder than ever, layered and insistent, calling me, commanding me, some even sounding like my grandmother, a woman I only knew from faded photographs and whispered family stories. By the time I stepped inside the farmhouse, I felt it in my blood. This storm wasn't ordinary. My cousins greeted me with exaggerated warmth, laughter bubbling too quickly from their mouths. I saw the hidden cameras tucked into corners, the phones propped up casually on tables, all of them pointed at me. They wanted to capture every flinch, every tremor, every tear. They wanted to make this the greatest humiliation yet. But the storm had other plans. The whispers pressed harder than ever before, echoing in my chest, rising with every taunt. I had spent my life begging for silence. Now, for the first time, I felt the urge to answer. And when lightning split the sky so violently the windows rattled in their frames, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I straightened my back, lifted my head, and stared into the storm. And for the first time in my life, I whispered back. The farmhouse shook under the weight of the storm, its old beams groaning like something alive. Rain hammered against the glass, thunder cracked so close it made the floor tremble, but I was calm. Calmer than I had ever been. My cousins thought they were clever, thought I didn't notice the cameras tucked into corners, the phones angled at me, waiting to capture my fear. They thought they were building their masterpiece. But the storm was building something else. The voices inside the thunder were deafening. They weren't whispers anymore. They were chants. Some called me by name, some urged me to listen, and one that carried a weight heavier than the others, sounded like my grandmother. Her voice rose with the storm, threading itself through the thunder until I couldn't tell where the sky ended and she began. The storm wasn't haunting me. It was guiding me. My cousins jeered, urging me closer to the window, shouting for me to show the camera what fear looks like. Their laughter scraped against my ears, but it didn't sting the way it once had. Instead, every taunt fueled the voices. Every cruel smile sharpened the storm's anger. I could feel it pressing inside my chest, sinking with my heartbeat. For the first time, I realized the fear I had carried all my life wasn't weakness. It was power I hadn't claimed. Lightning split the sky so violently that for a second, the room filled with blinding white. When the darkness returned, I was still standing, still calm. Their laughter wavered. I saw it in their eyes, the unease. They weren't used to silence from me. They weren't used to strength. They wanted a trembling girl. What they got was a girl who finally understood the storm was hers. The whispers grew louder, rising into words I didn't choose but spoke anyway. My lips moved, and the storm answered. The thunder seemed to roll in time with my voice, echoing back my words, claiming me as its own. My cousins froze. They had wanted to capture fear, but it was their own fear that seeped into the room now. One of them swore he saw something outside, shapes moving in the clouds, figures drawn from lightning itself. He laughed to cover it, but it was the laughter of a boy realizing he no longer had control. Another muttered that maybe they should turn the cameras off. For the first time, they weren't sure of their game. But I was. I felt the storm inside me, rising higher, demanding release. It had been waiting all my life, waiting for this night, for this moment when I would stop running from it and finally listen. My grandmother's voice threaded through the thunder, telling me what I had always suspected but never dared to believe: this wasn't a curse. It was inheritance. The farmhouse rattled again, the windows trembling in their frames, and I stared at my cousins, wide-eyed, silent now, unsure. They had fed on my fear for years, but tonight, the storm had chosen me. And I was done being afraid. The storm outside screamed louder than it ever had before, yet inside me there was no trembling, no terror, no desperate wish to hide. There was only stillness, as if the thunder itself had fallen into rhythm with my heart. I looked at my cousins and saw not the mocking faces of people who believed they controlled me, but frightened children clinging to a game they no longer understood. They had always thought the storm broke me, but they were wrong. The storm had been waiting. And now, so was I. They muttered to each other in the flickering candlelight, trying to laugh again but failing. The bravado that had fueled them drained as the thunder rolled across the valley like a living creature circling its prey. I could hear the voices clearer than ever. They no longer whispered in fragments but spoke in full, commanding tones. They told me to let go, to stop fighting, to embrace the inheritance that had been pressing against my soul since I was a child. My grandmother's voice rose among them, steady and sure, telling me that storms had always chosen one. That one was me. A cousin, the boldest among them, told me to stop staring, to stop acting strange. His voice cracked, betraying the fear clawing at his chest. He gripped his phone tightly, recording even now, desperate to hold on to the game, to prove to himself that this was still under his control. But his hand shook as lightning burst just beyond the window, so close the glass hissed with heat. The phone slipped slightly in his grip, and I smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not the smile of someone collapsing. A smile that belonged to someone who finally understood her place in the world. The air in the farmhouse shifted. The pressure of the storm pressed inward, filling every corner, rattling the beams, swelling the silence between each strike of thunder. They whispered about shutting everything off, about ending the joke, but I could see it in their eyes. They no longer saw me as the weak girl they had cornered. They saw me as something else entirely. I stood, and every candle flickered as if the air itself bent to my movement. The wind outside surged against the walls, and the voices in the thunder swelled, singing a chorus that only I could understand. I walked toward the window and placed my hand against the glass. The storm pressed back like a heartbeat meeting mine. For the first time I wasn't resisting it. I was welcoming it. They shouted for me to sit down, to stop whatever I thought I was doing, but their words were brittle. I whispered instead, and the thunder answered me. My cousins froze. They looked at each other, then at me, as the storm repeated my words, magnified and echoing across the valley as if the sky itself had become my mouth. Their laughter was gone now. Their fear was raw. The ringleader cursed and told me to cut it out, to stop scaring everyone. He moved toward me, phone raised, trying to shove the camera in my face as proof of his control. But before he could take another step, lightning struck the tree outside, so violently that shards of bark exploded against the glass. The house shook. He stumbled backward, his phone tumbling from his hand. The storm was no longer outside. It had crossed into me. I felt it coiled in my veins, humming under my skin, burning in my chest. I raised my hand slightly, and the candles dimmed to almost nothing. The storm roared with approval. The cousins screamed, scrambling back, knocking into furniture, their phones clattering across the floor. The prank had collapsed into chaos. Their game was over. I turned to them, my voice steady for the first time in years. You thought the storm mocked me. You thought it made me weak. But it has always been mine. Their faces drained of color. They huddled together, no longer laughing, no longer taunting. The ringleader tried to insist it was a trick, that I had planned this, but the fear in his voice betrayed him. None of them believed their own words anymore. The thunder crashed again, closer, louder, shaking the foundations of the house as if the storm itself bent to my will. The whispers guided me now, not as tormentors but as allies. They told me to remember every night I had been mocked, every moment my fear had been turned into entertainment. They told me to remember the humiliation, the betrayal, the isolation. Not to hold on to it as weakness, but to turn it into power. I stepped toward them, and they scrambled back, tripping over each other in their desperation. Their fear was everything they had tried to harvest from me for years. Now they were drowning in it. I let the storm seep from my voice, each word vibrating with thunder. You wanted my fear. Now feel it for yourselves. The house creaked under the weight of the wind. The roof rattled as if the sky was trying to rip it away. The cousins screamed for me to stop, begged me to calm down, but their pleas only fed the storm. They had never listened to my cries. They had mocked every tear, every panic. Now their own terror was a chorus I let the thunder carry away. The ringleader tried to rush me again, shoving past the others, determined to prove he wasn't afraid. He raised his hand as if to grab me, but before his fingers reached, lightning exploded outside, and every window in the farmhouse shattered at once. Glass rained across the floor, candles snuffed out, and the only light left was the violent glow of the storm. He froze mid-step, his bravado gone, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, sliced by shards of glass. Blood ran between his fingers. He wasn't laughing anymore. The storm's power surged higher, feeding on my focus, responding to my every unspoken thought. I understood then why I had always heard voices in the thunder. It wasn't madness. It was inheritance. It was bloodline. My grandmother's face flickered in the lightning outside, a spectral presence shaped from clouds and flame. She smiled, proud, before vanishing back into the storm's embrace. I was not alone. I had never been alone. My cousins clung to one another, their phones forgotten, their cruel laughter swallowed by sobs and screams. The storm had turned the tables. They had wanted a recording of my collapse, proof of my weakness. Instead, they would remember this night as the moment their fear consumed them. The storm begged for release, for justice, for balance. My veins burned with its demand, but I held steady, letting it build, letting them feel every moment of dread they had forced upon me. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand that every mocking glance, every cruel laugh, every humiliating stunt had led to this. The farmhouse groaned again, the walls bowing as if the storm's pressure would crush it flat. I stood at the center of it all, calm, steady, unshaken, as the sky tore itself apart in my name. The inheritance had awakened, and there was no going back. Their screams rose higher as the wind tore through the shattered windows, lifting papers, dragging furniture, snapping wood. The thunder crashed in sync with my heartbeat, and I whispered once more, not words of fear, but a command. The storm roared back, answering me with fury. For the first time, I wasn't the girl who feared storms. I was the storm, and they were the ones trapped inside it. The farmhouse was no longer a shelter but a cage trembling under the weight of the storm. My cousins clung to one another, their faces pale in the flashes of lightning, their screams swallowed by the roar of thunder. Every corner of the house quivered as the inheritance surged through me, demanding an end, demanding balance. The storm was not content to scare them. It wanted them broken the way they had broken me. I raised my hand, and the wind answered instantly, tearing through the shattered windows with a shriek that ripped curtains from their hooks and slammed doors off their hinges. They scattered like frightened animals, scrambling over one another, but there was nowhere to run. The storm was inside the house now, in the very walls, in the air they breathed. It was mine, and they were mine. The ringleader tried to shout above the chaos, his voice hoarse and cracking, but the storm swallowed him whole. He stumbled toward me again, blood still dripping from his glass-sliced arm, his eyes wild with desperation. He wanted to end this, to silence me as he always had, to prove that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I no longer feared his laughter or his cruelty. I looked into his eyes and saw the boy who had thought he could use me for amusement, who had thought my fear made him strong. Now he shook before me, powerless. Lightning cracked so close behind him that the air split apart. His scream was cut short as the shockwave hurled him across the room. He slammed into the wall and crumpled, groaning, his phone slipping from his pocket and shattering against the floor. No more recordings. No more evidence of their games. The storm had erased it all. The others cried out for me to stop, pleaded that they hadn't meant it, that it had only been a joke. But I remembered every time they had told me the same thing before, every time they had reduced me to trembling silence and laughter that echoed in my head long after it was over. A joke was never just a joke when it left scars. A joke was never harmless when it stripped someone of their voice. Now they knew. The house itself seemed to bend as the storm pressed harder, shaking the beams, rattling the foundation, groaning under the weight of the sky's fury. I stepped forward, calm in the chaos, the voices of the storm guiding me, lifting me. My grandmother's whisper threaded through the thunder, "This is your inheritance. This is justice." My cousins tried to flee, but the door had blown shut, its frame splintered, locked by the storm itself. One of them tried the back window, but the wind slammed it back so hard it knocked him flat, shards of glass raining across the floor. Another cowered in the corner, sobbing, her hands clamped over her ears as if she could block out the roar that filled the room. None of them could escape. They had trapped me once. Now they were the ones trapped. I lifted both hands, and the storm held in unison with me. The farmhouse shook as if the earth itself quaked beneath it. The cousins fell to their knees, screaming, praying, begging, promising anything if I would just stop. But their words rolled off me like water. They had ignored mine for years. They had called me weak, childish, broken. They had told me to grow up, to get over it. And yet here they were, reduced to the same trembling fear they had once delighted in watching me suffer. I whispered one final command, and the storm obeyed. Lightning struck the roof, splitting it open with a deafening crack. Flames burst across the rafters, hissing as the rain poured in, smoke curling into the choking air. The cousins scrambled, coughing, crying, blinded by panic. But I stood still, the rain sliding over my skin like silk, the fire reflecting in my eyes. The ringleader staggered to his feet again, wounded and desperate, trying to rally the others, but none followed him. He shouted that this wasn't real, that I wasn't doing this, that storms couldn't be controlled. But even he no longer believed his own words. His voice broke with terror as another bolt of lightning struck so close it lit every corner of the house with blinding white. His body jerked backward, slammed to the ground, motionless. The smell of ozone and scorched earth filled the air. The rest of them collapsed into silence, their sobs dying into whimpers as they cowered, too afraid to move. The storm quieted slightly, its fury no longer wild but deliberate, resting in my hands, waiting for my decision. I looked at them, faces once full of cruel amusement now pale with despair, and I felt no pity. Only balance. "You laughed when I cried," I whispered, my voice carried by the thunder itself. "You mocked what you could never understand. And now you will never forget what it means to fear." The storm answered with one final roar, tearing through the house, ripping beams from their foundations, scattering the roof into the night sky. The cousins screamed as the floor split beneath them, the walls collapsing inward. Rain and fire and wind swallowed everything in sight. When it was over, there was nothing left of the farmhouse but charred wood and shattered stone scattered across the soaked ground. The fire hissed into steam, and the storm began to fade, its purpose fulfilled. The voices quieted, no longer demanding, only murmuring their approval as they withdrew back into the clouds. I stood alone among the ruins, untouched, the storm's power humming low but steady in my veins. My cousins were gone. Their laughter silenced forever. The prank that was meant to humiliate me had become their final mistake. The night air softened as the storm drifted away, rolling back into the horizon, leaving only the smell of rain and smoke. I looked at the sky, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear. I had always believed the storm hated me, that it existed to torment me. But I had been wrong. It had been waiting for me, guiding me, shaping me. And now it was part of me. The inheritance had awakened, and it could never be put back to sleep. I walked away from the ruins without looking back, the storm's whispers still curling in my ears, promising they would always be there when I called. The girl who once trembled in the dark was gone. In her place remained something far stronger, far older, and far more dangerous. They had laughed at my fear. Now the world would learn to fear me. If this story gripped you, don't let the storm end here. Subscribe for more chilling tales of revenge and secrets that refuse to stay buried. Share your thoughts below. What would you have done? Hit the bell, because the next storm is already approaching.